Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Build Your Copywriting Business podcast. Hey there, Kate.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Okay, so today, guys, we are going to talk about something that plagues writers in general. But the good news is that as copywriters, you don't have to deal with it quite as much. And even if you do deal with it, we've got some tactics that we're going to share with you in this episode. So, Nicki, what are you actually talking about? Get to the point. We're talking about blank page panic. When you sit down, you open up a document on your computer, you've got a blank page facing you, and you go, I have no idea what to write. Kate, I'm sure that you have experienced that. I've experienced that in the times, especially the times when I've tried to do a little bit of creative writing, fiction writing, as opposed to copywriting. It is very, very common among writers in general.
Mm-hmm. And I know in our group in the CCA, there are many of us who I know a lot of people like to say are recovering perfectionists. I get it. And I think that's part of where this comes from, where you don't necessarily want to put anything out there that isn't going to be your final product, or you're not letting yourself just go. It's wanting to craft the perfect thing right out the gate and have the stock look beautiful and feel great. And I think that's a lot of where this stems from. So keep that in mind as you're going, that it's going to be a mess before it gets clean again. It's like cleaning your house, do a spring cleaning. You need to sometimes take out everything in the closet to put it back nicely. It doesn't always start out beautiful. And so what I like to do to start, I don't have any sort of template that I use to start projects. I start every project by saying, okay, it's an email or a website or whatever it is. What elements do I know I'm going to need on this page? So for an email, I'll write, subject line in brackets. I know that's my space where my subject line is going to go. And so I start to have these elements and it just feels a little bit more manageable. There's something on the paper now. It maybe takes 5 minutes, but it gets my brain moving and there's something on the paper now. It's not blank.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we say blank page panic, but really you're never at a point where you have no idea what needs to go on that page, because every project, first of all, to Kate's point, you're going to know what the project is. You're going to know what some of the essential structural elements of this are going to be. But also, too, remember that you're coming into any project after having a really in-depth input call with your client, asking all kinds of questions, getting all kinds of answers, and putting together a creative brief for yourself and for your client, too, to make sure you're both on the same page. But so you know what it is that you need to convey. And yes, that is not the same as having the exact words that you're going to use in the document, but you're not starting out with no idea of what to say, no idea of what direction you want to go. You have the creative brief is kind of your goal. These are what you want to get across. These are the pieces that have to be in your puzzle somewhere. And in your Word doc or, Google Doc, whatever you use, you're going to figure out how to put them together.
Yeah. And if anyone, just to really emphasize that point, creative brief, if you haven't done one, or I don't want to skim over that because I know it's so easy to skip. So if you haven't put one together, but you have your notes from the discovery call, do one. Organize those notes, really comb through it and organize it in your brief so you can go back to and refer to that brief. Ideally, you would have done your creative brief, at the beginning of this process after your kickoff call with your client, potentially even sending it to your client to make sure that you're all on the same page to say, here's what I've put together. Does this capture everything we went over in the meeting? Because this is what I'm going to execute on. So creative brief. And one of my favorite things in the creative brief is you talk about what the goal is for the project, right? You know your call to action. You might not know, to Nikki's point, exactly how you want to say everything yet, but that's often where I like to start, is putting in my CTA and saying, this is what I know I want the action I want people to take. It's going to be very rough. Maybe it's like request more information. I'm like, well, that's not the tone and I need to change it later, but that's the idea. So it's there. It's a placeholder, and it starts to allow the rest of the piece to take shape. And I can come back later and say, okay, now tone, voice, how do I want to say this same thing, but with some different word choices, and what are some different ways I could do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The creative brief is the scaffolding, or it's the frame of the house. It's what you have to put up first so that you can build on it. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to hammer this point again. You cannot skip the creative brief. Almost all of the times when we've talked to students or talked to copywriters who said, there's obviously an overlap, but you know what I'm saying. And when we talk to people who say, oh God, I just don't know where to go with this project. It's just, I can't seem to wrap my mind around it. I say, all right, well, pull out the creative brief. Let's take a look. Crickets. Because there wasn't a creative brief. Spare yourself the misery. I don't care where you are in your career. If you are brand new to it, creative brief. If you've been doing it for almost 20 years, the way I have, creative brief. Anyway, once you have that creative brief, this is another step that people skip, right, Kate? Outline. Put together an outline. Your outline is the kind of the interim step between you have all of your pieces and the outline is you're starting to put them in order. You don't even have to begin the writing yet. You don't even have to begin well, I want to say it in this way. If you have ideas, great, put those notes in there, put those notes somewhere. But you're taking all the disparate pieces and you're starting to put them in an order. If in my head, I love a metaphor. If it's jigsaw puzzle, for example, this would be the step in the jigsaw puzzle where you pull out all the edge pieces and you're putting the edge pieces there. Or all right, I see a lot of blue stuff, that blue stuff, I'm going to grab all those pieces and put those over there. A lot of red ones, all the red pieces are going to go over here. I'm not assembling them yet, but I'm putting them where I need them to go and putting where those elements are. So you'll put, I have the benefit and I know that I want the benefit to be in the headline. I have for this project, I am going to list out the features because that's good for this project. Obviously, it's not perfect for every project. It depends on the project. It's going to differ from project to project, which is why you need an outline. And you can start putting those pieces where you want them to be in the rough order. Again, to Kate's point, this is not where you let those perfectionist tendencies lie. This is your working document. You're playing around here. Remember that there is strategy in copywriting, but part of also why we love it is because there's creativity in copywriting. Writing is still an art and copywriting is an art. And part of that is giving yourself the room to play with these elements and play with where they're going to go and obviously play with language as well. But before you even get to that language step, start figuring out where stuff needs to go.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, especially on bigger projects, even sometimes I give my client an outline of what I'm thinking to make sure we're on. Again, want to, as through the process, save myself time, energy, and frankly, money, because if I'm doing a project great, that's what I tend to do, I don't want to do the whole thing and then find out I missed something along the way. So I'm thinking an email funnel, for example, outlining what I'm thinking. I have all the pieces. Okay, now what makes sense for email one? And I'll type throughout my thinking, type kind of what the rough idea is. This email will communicate, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't have to be that formal, but it helps me kind of type out loud, think out loud, think through typing, and organize what each step is going to be. Similarly, for a web page, taking that out, and I'm thinking, let's just use a homepage, forget a whole website. A whole website, you're going to want to really outline each page and have a brief for each page. What's the goal of each page? But so thinking about a homepage, okay, for example, what Nicki was saying, I want the benefit in the headline. I want their value proposition in that headline. And then this first section is really going to be about why this company and why the benefit of going with this company. The next section is going to be about their products or services. And, we're going to mention 3 or 4 or whatever it is. And then a small section about the company. And then maybe whatever, call to actions, where are they going to be peppered out, and really think through what's going to go where. Okay, from my notes, let me dump my notes into these certain blocks to say, okay, here are the kind of facts and or angles that I need to incorporate into each of these sections. Ooh, this section has a lot. Do I need to break that up into multiple sections? Or here's what I want to get into this headline. Maybe I need a subhead now. Let me think about that. And you don't even have to nail down whether you're going to have a headline or subhead or section headers just yet. This is figuring out these big chunks in the outline. And maybe you start to think about some of the smaller, more detailed elements of how that will actually break down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and put notes to yourself in this document as you're putting this. You're like, oh, I just want a subhead. Ooh, because this little fact will help support that headline, and it could just be add in XYZ. You don't have to start if you're like, ooh, I want to make sure to use this word here. Then make a little note to yourself. But it should be a rough document, and also too, this is not set in stone. Don't you perfectionists out there, loosen that grip. This does not, just because you put together an outline doesn't mean that, okay, now I have to force all the copy up and all the messaging to fit into this outline. No, it's just to give you an idea of what needs to go where, and also so you don't forget elements. Right? I know that there have been times, usually earlier in my career, but when I'll get to the end of something I wrote, go back to the creative brief, because we always do that with every project, right? Before we send it to the client, go back to the creative brief to make sure that I covered off everything, go back to the brief and go, oh man, I forgot this key element. Now I have to go in and rearrange stuff so that it makes sense in there. It doesn't seem like I just crammed it in there because I forgot to put it in there originally. You have that ability to move things around. But again, that's part of why the outline is so important, because it helps you make sure that you have all the elements, even if as you're writing it out, you go, wait a minute. I'm putting, and I didn't realize when I was putting the outline together that I would go down this angle, but now that I'm actually writing it, this makes a little bit more sense. And this point might work well with this point, or this point might follow this one here. So you can play around with it as you're going. It does not have to be, you're not sitting down and writing an email to your mother, or writing an email to your grandmother or something like that, where you sit down and you go, this is how you're just beginning to end straight through, right? That's not how copywriting is. It's moving your messages around and making sure that they make the most sense and that they flow well, so that people start out at the top and they're interested. We know no matter what piece of copy it is that we lose their interest as they go, just because that's just how people work. But when you organize it really well and you make each piece build on the next piece through your messaging. And I for those of you who are watching the video, I'm kind of working my way down.
There are a lot of hand gestures,
yes,
so
definitely
check out the video.
Yes, sorry, I will explain, my podcast friends. And no, but I thinking just linearly. Think of people starting at the top of the page and working their way down and just losing interest as they go their way down. And quite frankly, that works with any type of event. It's the same thing with banner ads. You have their most attention. The first one, you lose them as they go through. But when you structure a piece well, and when you structure it very carefully so that each message leads to the next one as you work down the page, you have a better chance of keeping their interest all the way through without losing them.
Yeah, and keep in mind when you're working on any project, really, that often the more you dig in, the more you're going through this process, what you might start with is what you think is this is going to be the headline. This is the idea. As you dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the content, by the bottom of the page, that's actually where you might get to wait, this is what needs to come all the way to the top. And so again, for folks not watching, my hand motions, hand start at the bottom, going back to the top. You can move pieces like that of like, oh, this is in the middle of my thing. Maybe I need to take this whole chunk, cut it, paste it above everything else because it is the most important piece, or whatever it is. So give yourself that opportunity and and build in your timeline that as time goes on through the project, you're going to be more familiar with the content. You're going to have a deeper understanding, and inevitably things are going to shift. And you might be like the type of, I'm reading one of my husband's final essays for school, and great essay, but he wrote to the thesis. And so that, like, one of the last conclusion sentences, nope, that goes way back to the top. It's kind of similar with this, in that you might get to the end of your project and realize that you have some really great lines that need to be pulled out. And so you pull them out.
Exactly. Well, and that's, we talk about after you write your first draft, get up and walk away, or, do some
Mhm.
laundry, go for a walk around the block, whatever.
Sleep on it if you can.
Sleep on it. But if you have time in your schedule, do the same thing after your outline. Because
Yes.
anytime you can give your brain the opportunity to process what you're working on, you'll end up with something better. So if you have the time in your schedule, or if you can balance things out this way, take your creative brief, open up your working document, put together your outline, and then if at all possible, get up and do something different, do something not writing related. Don't watch TV because it does not give your brain a break or give it a chance to work. But do laundry, do all that stuff around the house that we hate to do. Okay, I hate to do, but it's really good for letting your brain process things in the background, so that when you come back to start writing from your outline, because that's the next step, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are able to Kate's point, rearrange things as you need to, or just you may find that the lines for your actual copywriting come to you a little bit faster because your brain has been working on this project while you've been doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So writing.
So writing. So if you're going to do some copy projects for a client, you should probably do a little copywriting. Yes.
So you might have words and phrases that you came to in your outline, and definitely as you think of things, you're like, "Ooh, I like this phrase or I like this word." Put it in there. You might have a long list of different things in different sections of different iterations on a particular line. I know for me, what I think is like, "Ooh, this is the greatest line." I'm inevitably go back to it and say, "Oh, there's a far better, more succinct way to say what I thought was a great line." And so prepare to iterate on those words and phrases that you really, really liked.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe some of them stick and you start to place them where they go. And in this stage, I personally like to have two documents. On my laptop, it gets a little tricky. It does fit. I do have another monitor, which is super, super helpful. Business expense, write it off.
Yeah.
To have two Word, Google Doc, whatever you're using, two documents up at the same time. One I call kind of my messy document. It's where I keep everything because I can't tell you how many projects I've done where I've written a line, deleted it, and been like, no, that's not it. And then thought, hours and hours later, way past the time of being able to go back and do Control Z or undo, that line's gone. I'm like, oh, what was that line? What was that idea? It might not have been the perfect line, but it was the idea. And now it's completely gone. So I have my mess that maintains everything. I don't delete anything because you never know. And then I have, for my perfectionists out there, I might what I call my clean doc, messy clean doc, and I start copying things in from the messy doc. So I'm working in the messy doc and copying into the clean document, and potentially sometimes things come out of the clean
Mm-hmm.
document as well. That's
Yeah.
not gold either, but it gives me a way to work with two things and really
Mm-hmm.
see my kind of what I'm working towards versus what I'm working with. So I have all the
Mm-hmm.
pieces versus my kind of, to use the puzzle metaphor, that the frame's done and
Mm-hmm.
things are starting to fill in, and sometimes you put two pieces together that you think go together and actually they don't.
Don't.
So same thing. I know, it's the worst.
Yes. Confuses me for so
Yeah.
long on those 1,000-piece puzzles. I do it slightly differently. I have still two docs because I agree. I think that makes it just easier to manage versus trying to do all of that in one doc. And then I have what I would just call a notes doc. And then I
Mm.
have a working doc. And it's very similar in that this is my super messy and this is my cleaner. But my working doc is not necessarily like my finished.
Mhm.
This is still I'm drafting work here, but I have my notes in. I don't know why it's in my head. It's always, or on my screen. It's always on my left is my notes doc, and on my right is
That's what I
my.
do as
That's
well.
probably something
Funny
that our
enough. I
brains
don't know.
operate.
It's because we're right-handed. I don't
Oh,
know.
could be. But then I can refer back to my notes doc, and this notes doc, same thing, is if there's a line and I go, nope, you know what? I love that line. It doesn't make sense in this project. It gets pulled out of the working doc, but it gets saved in the note doc. I'm always hitting
Mhm.
save on both of those.
Mhm.
And I keep the notes doc and I keep the working doc in the same folder. so that I know where they are. I can easily refer back to them. And the thing too about keeping those lines or phrases or whatever is that they might not work for, you might get to the end of the project and you're like, I love that line, but it doesn't work for this project. It might work for another project with this client, or it might work for, you might just be able to use it somewhere else. But you do have to be kind of ruthless with yourself as you go. But that's something else I want to remind you guys of, is you're going to do multiple drafts, and it's a spectrum, right? Maybe you have actual delineated drafts. This was my draft 1, this was my draft 2. Me, it's kind of like we're kind of exactly evolving. Yeah, but it's not going to be perfect in the first time you write everything out. It's not going to be perfect. When you get to the point you're like, okay, I've got all the messages in there, call to action, good to go. You're not done. And I know people are like, but I worked so hard. Yeah, you did, but there's still one more step. You still have to, this is that stepping away again. If you got a chance to step away earlier, coming back and doing your self-editing, because you want to polish this and get it as good as possible. Nothing is perfect, so we're not talking perfection here, but you want to put your very best foot forward with what you send to your client. So before you send your first draft, go through and edit it. Go through, compare it to your creative brief, compare it to your outline if you want to add in that step. Creative brief, essential, outline, maybe not as essential. And then too, this is the time to go through and be gentle but ruthless with yourself and make sure that you don't have any extraneous copy in there. Is everything that's in there essential to it? Or are there things in there that you're like, no, actually, this doesn't need to be said. And I say the same thing up here as I say down here. Essentially, one of these has got to go. Or, something that we talk about a lot on our coaching calls when we're evaluating or giving feedback, I should say, on our student portfolios. Thank you. That is the word. Is you have to remember where people are in the customer journey. And that's the same thing for your projects on student portfolios, for example. People are coming to your portfolio site because you have like 99% of the time, it's going to be because you pitched them, because someone else referred you to them. They're coming to your site because they're deciding if they want you for a copywriter, not if they're deciding they want copy at all. By the time they get to your website, they already know that they want copy written for them. They're trying to decide on whether you or not. So what I'm saying is that on student websites, sometimes we'll see people explaining why copy is important, which at this point in the customer journey, in your potential client's journey, they already know that they want copy. They're trying to decide about you. So strip out anything that explains to them why copy is important. They don't need to be educated in that way. And look out for the same thing in all of your client projects too. Don't just get too focused on the messaging on the page. Remember where they're going to be in this customer journey. On a sales page, for example, I mean, obviously you want to validate this with your client, but if they're getting to a sales page, it's very likely that they have already been through maybe a long sales email series or maybe a long nurturing series or something like that. So there may be elements that if someone had no knowledge of your client, no previous knowledge of the industry or the product at all, maybe there are elements that you would normally put on there, but maybe there are elements that you should not have on there because they're going to distract from the things that this audience needs to know at this step in the customer journey. Yeah.
And I know, keep all of that stuff. Again, I know Nicki mentioned it earlier, but I want to call it out again. If you have, another project with a client you've worked with in the past, another way to, when you have that blank document and you're not sure where to start, pull up your previous notes document from that client and see, are there lines for one client in particular that I did significant ongoing work with years and years and years ago. I would, at the end of each project, I would have a separate doc for them. So the client's name, and I would put all of these lines that didn't get used for that project that I said, these are things I could maybe use in the future, words, phrases, ideas, concepts that I can revisit. And so for that client in particular, but you could do it for each client if it made sense, have a document for them and to say, okay, this is my document. I'm going to open up at the start of each project to see if there's anything from here that gets my brain going. It's a more focused brainstorm because it's about that client. It's not just, pulling up Google, which can be helpful, but
Mhm.
not necessarily if you're trying to write for a specific client. It can be helpful if if you're Googling competitors and you see what they've done,
Mhm.
and you're writing an email for their competitor and you say, I'm going to sign up for this client's email list, or I'm going to look at their website because I'm writing a website. What have they done? Obviously not using that copy. It should be a completely different tone likely, and potentially a different audience, but you can use the competitors as a way to get your brain going. If you know that looking at that will just make you want to take it word for word, if you know that that's just inevitably how you operate, I know that can be very hard to see something and then write something different. That may not be the tactic that you go
Mhm.
with, but I would recommend after, once you've worked with clients, to have your list of, here's stuff that I could use
Mhm.
to get the brainstorm process going.
I love that. And you're just doing future you a favor, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
and really bonus points too, if you put in notes and really do future you a favor and say, I didn't use this line because, but I loved
Mm-hmm.
this line because, so that you don't have to go back and go, God, this is a good line. Why didn't I include this?
Such a good point, because
Yeah.
I always think I'm going to remember. And I've learned now, if I don't write it down or have a system for knowing what, like, to capture that memory, it's gone, it's lost.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There's so many, and especially when you're working with multiple clients, there's so many thoughts going through
yeah.
your head. Your brain is processing so
Was
much
it this client
stuff.
or was it this client? I don't
Yes.
know.
Yes. Make notes for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to go too far down this road, of course, but make sure stuff is backed up automatically so that you can't lose it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so you've gone all the way from blank page. You have written your first draft. You have revised your first draft, and your next step is off to your client. Now, after that is a whole other series, and that's a whole other podcast episode itself. Um, but hopefully, all of this has made you a little bit more comfortable with the idea of sitting down and opening up a Word doc or opening up a Google Doc and getting started. Because, like I said, we called the episode Blank Page Panic, or How to Overcome Blank Page Panic, or whatever we end up actually calling it when it's time to set it live. But really, as copywriters, we never truly do have a blank page. We always have pieces that need to go into it, elements that need to be incorporated. And if you try to sit down and just write, try to sit down and literally type onto a blank page, that's when you're going to get into trouble. You're going to be setting yourself up for frustration and confusion, and you're going to hit a brick wall. Um,
Yeah, the picture's not going to come into focus right away. It's going to be a little bit blurry, and you working through that will slowly bring things into focus. And I do want to mention, because this comes up a lot, I think more when people are first starting out, but even as copywriters go on in their careers, because I don't think anyone necessarily talks about it, but there's no right or wrong when it comes to setting up your copy document. And what I mean by that is we give you, in the CCA students know, we have kind of an example or several examples how to set up a copy document. But inevitably there's going to be, depending on your project, there might be, I have a section header and then a section subheader. Maybe I don't have that subhead. And so I want to be clear that not every project, not every email is going to have a multiple sections, or not every homepage is going to have an about section necessarily, or whatever it is. Not every header area is going to also have a subhead. You might not have a subhead. So many possible combinations, as many combinations as there
mhm.
are of things in the world, millions and millions. But so don't get caught up in thinking I need to have a subhead in every section. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but
Mhm.
you'll only find that out by working with what you've got and starting to put some of the pieces onto the page and start to have things come into focus for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So don't beat yourself up on the language of it. I think that the idea is the client and or designer or developer, whoever is going to really be using your copy document, needs to know what each element is. But beyond that, there's no, I often do section 1 headline, section 1 body, or whatever it is, but someone else might just say subhead, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So communication as clear as possible, but there's no hard and fast, this is right, this is wrong.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's, no, it's not as simple as using a template for every single project that we do. But aren't you glad that it isn't? Because first of all, what we do takes skill and takes finesse, and that's why we get paid well to do it. But also, it would be so boring if all you had to do was fill in this piece in here and this piece in here, and Mom, this needs a subhead, so this could be. That would be boring. What we do is so much more interesting and challenging in a good way, that, thank goodness, it involves putting a puzzle together, and we're not even really going to know what the puzzle is going to look like until it's all done. We finish our draft and we go, oh, that's good. I can't wait to send that off to my client. This is good stuff. Okay, so no more blank page panic for you guys. And quite frankly, no more blank pages anyway. Set yourself up by starting, obviously, always with a creative brief and with your outline, and you will be already setting yourself up for success. So we will catch you on the next episode of the Build Your Copywriting Business podcast. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you don't miss any tips, tools, or tactics for copywriters by clicking subscribe right now. And of course, you can always find us over at filthyrichriter.com. We'll see you next time.